same time?
Well, asking an ad man how to be truthful is not a question I've ever heard before. Not the best person to answer that. The reality is, most of the world's, when I first started working in the farming community, that was actually one of the points I made. I think the problem with the branding so far, the problem with the messaging is, a lot of people have been looking for silver bullets. Now, if you take a look at that video, it's meant to show how complex it is. Each one of those needs to be broken down into different events, programs, engagements to get specific messages across with somebody, not on your own. But it is not possible to sum up the complexities of what you guys do with an ad campaign, with a sports star. It just doesn't work like that. It's way too complex, and there's too much interrogation by consumers on sites now and in communities. So it's more about, if you were to take, I mean, don't forget the other problem you have is you live in a very complex world with everything we've been talking about. The reality is the attention span now has reduced to 6 seconds. So you're never going to get this message across in basic marketing. It's just not going to happen. You're going to have to do it through programs, you're going to have to do it through interventions in society, and you're going to have to do it in ways that really entertain people to want to see more and not try and educate them. I mean, one of the hardest things anyone of my age has had to accept is, you know, the kind of age of reason has gone. People don't want to be educated. They want us to know that we understand their feelings and their opinions, and we take them on board, and then we engage. And that's how brands have started to change their dialogue with consumers, as opposed to the old way of doing things.
And just to take that slightly further forward, how important then is it going to be that there's a drip, drip, drip that's then working its way into the subconscious, or do we have to be much more brazen?
I think there's different levels of it. I think with something as powerful and as important as farming clearly is, I think you do need thought leadership which captures the imagination. And it may have sounded glib, how do you start an intellectual project which turns the Sahara into the lungs of the earth? But those kind of projects are what, you know, that's what IBM did when they said, we can beat Kasparov at chess in 3 years' time. We can write a better movie than Hollywood. You know, all these kind of things put them on the map and said, this is the hierarchy of where we're going, what we want to achieve. And it demonstrates the brains that you actually have in your business. Whether you solve it or not is immaterial. But at the same time, you have to have the drip, drip, drip campaigns, and you have to have those engagements along with it. It can't just be one or the other.
Yeah, multifaceted.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Hello, Sarah Bell, I'm a farmer. I also work in supply chains. One of the things I consistently see is farmers being absolutely up for the sustainability challenge.
Yep.
But that equity that's being generated from a brand perspective not being able to be manoeuvred well enough back down the supply chain for the farmers to feel the real benefit of that,
Yep.
both in ownership of the initiatives
Yep.
and through increased demand or increased financial reward for that.
Yep.
Do you have any suggestions?
Yeah, that is a really big topic, but I do see a fundamental change possibly happening in that area. And it's coming through technology. So one of the ways to bypass this is the fact that provenance is becoming one of the biggest consumer requests and demands. And provenance means if this is the right soil and the right ingredients that creates the right wheat for the best bread, or this type of bread, or this type of bread, or whatever, then I want that. So the brand is moving down the supply chain. That is where your opportunity is. And that can be accelerated with some of the very partners that you work with. They've developed these apps that you can scan on the supermarket shelf, and it will tell you the provenance of every product and ingredient in it. That means that the source becomes the brand, not just the retailer or the manufacturer. And that's something I think you can experiment with building your own types of products. But I see the market going that way absolutely over the next 10 years. And that is a huge opportunity for you guys to move up the value chain.
And leverage as much as we possibly
Leverage
can.
it, and also, you know, the thing is that you've got to get ahead of it, or otherwise somebody else is going to take that money off you. It's going to happen, right?
Yeah.
Thank you. Sarah Mukherjee, and I'm another of the directors. We had a conversation in the context of the Henry Dimbleby presentation yesterday about the amount of money available for the big firms and the amount of money available for farmers to spend on advertising. And one of our contributors said, look, you know, we just don't have millions. I'm a beetroot farmer and I just don't have the money to make that sort of impact. Is it possible in these days of social media to do the sort of campaign you're talking about on a wing and a prayer?
You know, pretty much every industry asks the same thing, is, you know, how do I do more for less? And the reality is that the triangle used to be like this in communication, and you'd spend all your money up here on your big TV and whatever, and everything down here you wouldn't. That's basically where the money is today. Now, when you look at how humans relate to media these days, the triangle is inverted. So 80% of the conversations are the day-to-day social stuff, and they hardly see the big stuff down here. So the reality is, if you're comprehensive in your social media and you attach yourselves to the right conversations and understand them, then with the right insights, there is no reason why. I mean, a lot of the brands I work with today are purely digital. All of their growth has come from digital. You don't have to spend the tens of millions of dollars on TV campaigns and sports stars and all that kind of stuff to get your brand across anymore. That's one of the freedoms and the nightmares of the internet for my business. So the answer to your question is yes, but you've really got to know what you're doing in it to navigate it properly.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Mike Gooding, Map of Agriculture. The fact that there are 7.5 billion people on the planet alive and potentially 10 billion by 2050, you know, it's a simple fact of biology. We are feeding them. You know, if you stop eating, you do tend to drop dead after a while. So I wonder if our problem in our industry as farmers is that we actually lack confidence in what we deliver and the values we deliver. If you had a client who had these problems or who was not able to articulate those values, what advice would you give them?
Well, that's exactly the point. I mean, when I look at it as an outsider who's got limited engagement over the last 2 years with the farming community, compared to what I do with Coca-Cola or other brands which are fizzy water, and I compare that to what you guys do, I go, hang on a second. Why aren't you guys brimming with confidence, telling the world what you do, and demonstrating? And I think it needs a lot, because I think there's almost so much stuff you do, it's difficult. And I think because the consumer sees the end product after a chain of events, they don't necessarily associate you with that thing on their table in the same way that they should do. But my advice would be, look, you need to engage yourselves in the peripheries outside of food, because the science of what you do, the data of what you do, this is what is interesting to people. And when they see the contribution that you make in all of these other areas of fuels, materials, whatever, all of a sudden farming doesn't become just about food. It becomes about everything that's going on in the world. And then you bring the food in, if you know what I mean. But I wouldn't necessarily start there, because it's the perception there's so many people between you and what's on the plate, it gets a little bit confusing for people. Farming has a lot more to offer, and then your contribution to great food can come later. In my view, I think it's a different way of doing it.
And I think your video did highlight that wonderfully. And for me, look at it, I'm in the middle of recruiting new staff on the farm. And I thought, actually, what a wonderful video to highlight that it's not just all about running around with a shovel and a brush in your hand, that it really did highlight the expertise and specialism that we have across the whole
I think we had a conversation earlier. I think pretty much if you go to a university and look at most of the vocational degrees that are out there and jobs, any one of them can work in farming. Any single one of them. From MBAs to agriculturalists to economics to scientists, blah, blah, blah. They can all work in your industry. I don't see that as a consumer when I think about farming. I don't see that in the newspapers or on the television. I don't see that in trade fairs. I don't see that at recruitment fairs. I don't see the best and the brightest saying, oh, I want to work in farming. That I kind of wonder about. I don't really understand why that's the case. And when I showed that to a group of, I made that film last week, I finished that film. And I showed it to a group of young people in India, and they were like in their 18s, 20s, all doing MBAs, and they go, wow, I want to work in farming. Yeah. Because they didn't realize this. And that's kind of what I meant to answer your question. There's so much more to what you guys do. It infiltrates every aspect of our lives. And we need to be talking about that in a way that's, acceptable and engaging with people.
Thank you.
Will Vaughan France, farmer. When you look at the agriculture industry, we're looking at a lot of very fragmented businesses, a lot of very small businesses, feeding often into a diverse range of markets, some quite small, some into much larger businesses which are well branded themselves.
Yeah.
And then you have a series of representative bodies as well. Within a sector like agriculture and with farmers, how do you actually lead a sort of branding process? Because there's so many small players. How do you bring them together and actually get them to act in some sort of, let's say, not necessarily all saying exactly the same message, but at least there's the alignment to give credibility to an overall
Well,
brand to
I
the
think,
industry?
like all things, there's a wonderful problem or difficulty with the modern world and a wonderful advantage of it. The reality is you're not on your own anymore. As I said, farming is now partnering with Silicon Valley, with big tech companies, and they do have a lot of money. You work with the big pharma companies. They have expertises. And in every aspect of life today, collaboration is the only way. And by collaboration, it's an overused word. I don't mean cooperation and handing the baton on. I mean, conflict and arguments and whatever. But at the end of the day, I don't think you should be looking at doing it with your own. There are integral partners that you have that are vested in what you do and your success. And you need mechanisms and policies to work with them. So that's how I would start to think about the debate moving forward, as opposed to think about it in isolation, because in isolation we're all useless today. We can't do it on our own.
And my plug for Oxford then is going to be, this room is where the conversations begin. That here we have all elements of the industry and out with industry. It's not just the farmers that are in here. And that's, my plug for Oxford. The conversation, it's in our hands, so start it now. Number 4, please.
Hello, I'm David Hill. I manage a couple of mixed estates just south of here. Farming's a quite big and varied industry in terms of the people who are working in it. We've had diversity issues, which I'll pass aside. But there's some very, very good farmers and there's some, frankly, awful farmers. And I wince every time, particularly on social media, when we see bad practices, and particularly when we see the lobby groups highlighting these bad practices.
Yep.
From a marketing point of view, do you feel it's helpful for us to be highlighting those bad practices and trying to pull them up? Or do you think we're best to sort of unite and try and pretend that we're brilliant at everything and sell our story that way? Again,
one of the nightmares for advertising is we can't lie anymore. And unfortunately, people tend to find out the truth one way or the other, particularly now. And I think you'll find, we handled a particular crisis with a brand quite recently. And one half of the company said, let's just rough ride over it and show how great we are. And we said, no, let's pull it off the shelves and let's make a statement that until we are 100% secure that everything is corrected, we're going to take everything off the shelves. And we did that, and within 3 weeks, people were clamoring for the product for reasons I can't mention what that product was. People forgive you if they don't expect things to be perfect. But if you try and hide them, they will crucify you for it. Consumers will absolutely tear you to shreds if you lie to them and if they find out about it and if you try to hide something. If you make a mistake, own up to it and then tell them what you're going to do about it and be accountable for that. And then they will come back to you and they will thank you for that. People respect honesty and an attempt to change and get better. Nobody expects you to be perfect, certainly not in an industry as big as this.
A point further, though, from David's question would be that's the reality, but how do we then deal also with the misinformation that people are very happy to believe? And it's the countering of that is also a considerable challenge. I hope a lot of you have had conversations with XR on their doorstep. It's been enlightening on both sides. There's misinformation out there, and it's how do we actually counteract that without looking very defensive and overly earnest?
Well, this may sound glib, but it is about understanding those audiences. And the reality is every business and every industry has the same problem. There's misinformation, there's fake news, look at the Flat Earth Society, it's massive. Crying out loud.
They had a wonderful tweet about members all around the globe. I
all
thought
around
that
the
was
globe.
absolutely perfect.
I saw that.
I thought that was wonderful.
I thought that was terrific, yeah. But the reality is, I saw some of the guys outside and on the way to the debate last night, And I saw a number of people from this group, and myself included, just going up and having a chat and a conversation. Not necessarily about the things, but the weather and how's it standing outside. First of all, you create the human connection, which, by the way, you can do socially as well. Then you start a conversation when somebody says, oh, they're not that bad. And then you start having a debate. I mean, I know it sounds glib, but it really is old-fashioned common sense that you just have to apply digitally, that's all. The rules are the same, the method of delivery has changed, that's all.
Okay, thank you. Emily.
Hi, Emily Norton, one of the new directors of the Oxford Farming Conference. I wanted to take you back to that quadrant, and it sort of follows up on the points you were just making, Sally, about the sort of the polarisation of debate and within the industry. I think before I watched your video, probably feeling quite depressed, and that there's sort of perfect storm of different layers of attack which is coming at the industry, whether it's anti-meat or climate change, and feeling quite defensive as an industry. How do we get the messaging to the sort of the top right and bottom left of the quadrant, the neutrals and the detractors? Because I guess arguing with enemies is pointless. Speaking to loyalists, you know, they're on our side. So what are your key thoughts about how we start to be positive in those spaces? What are the lessons there?
Well, I think, you know, and it depends on which part of the business we're engaged in and what we're talking about. Obviously, meat versus cereals is going to approach it in different ways, and liquids versus anything else. I think that the key thing is you have to really, and I'm not sure what you guys do in terms of research, but every successful company I've worked with does a ton of research. So what these guys say out here and what they say on social media, they know, they've spoken to them, they've done intelligence, so they get their point of view. Once you understand their opinion, where it's coming from and what it means to them, then and only then can you start putting programs to rectify it, correct it, agree with it, or bring it on board. One of the questions we always ask when it's somebody is completely anti, and I actually think the enemies are the best people to speak to, because you learn a lot. And one of the things you always say is, okay, you want a meat-free world, tell me what that world looks like, and try and get them to explain beyond the cliches and the sound bites and the illogical stuff. You can do that in research groups, you can do that in many, many, many ways, but until you have that base knowledge, you can't come up with a hypothesis of what to do about it. And I don't know whether you have that knowledge or not, you may well have, but certainly in other industries I worked in, that's what we do. We find out what every one of those quadrants really thinks. Not to necessarily change their mind, sometimes to incorporate what they're saying. Sometimes we learn a lot too. And we decided in one big company I worked for, you know, we need to create beverages that are healthy for you, because obviously it makes sense. But we didn't quite know where it sat. So we developed our own thinking from that too. But that's the number one step to do.
Thank you. Number 2, please.
Ian Piggott, farmer. I was quite interested in the positioning of your video focusing on data and technology.
Yep.
I'm just interested, I do quite a lot of work with the younger generation, and I'm finding with the generation Zs and Ys that technology just, it doesn't, they expect it as a given. Yep. And so I don't see it as a lead into agriculture as a way to try and attract them to have a better knowledge of the way that where their food comes from and actually being more prone to buying British. Have you looked at any work at how we try and engage with that younger audience as well?
You know, I haven't specifically, but all I can do, I mean, what my talk today and my knowledge was is generalist. I haven't gone down to any specific. But I would say that generally when I talk to and have worked with younger people regarding their aspirations for working, it has changed dramatically, as I'm sure you all know. The days of working like this over a period of years in a single industry have gone. People want 2, 3, 4, 5 careers. They don't want a boss, they want to learn something and then move on. In your kind of business, that's going to be tough. That's going to be tough because you need lifelong skills to do your job properly. So there's got to be things around, you know, I'm not a recruitment expert, but I would think, like a lot of other industries that are struggling because they take training and lifelong skills, you're going to have to add things around the proposition to keep people. I think you can excite young people to come into any business. The question is, will they stay? 60% will not. They will move to another industry. So how do you reduce that 60% to 30% when you hire them with your investments? And it's going to be more than the job. It's going to be about lifestyle. It's going to be about entertainment. It's going to be about all sorts of things. Unfortunately, they're the bigger things that we all have to deal with the younger generation.
And I think coming back to also accepting how they feel and taking them on as individuals rather than just...
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when I first moved to India, we tried to set up a process for delivery for the UK and the US. And it was a complete and utter disaster because we'd written the process in the UK. And after sitting there for 2 or 3 months, I just watched people and what the dynamics were and the waves of how they did things. And I redesigned it based on how things are. And basically, people come in late because the traffic's awful. Then they talk about the traffic being awful for an hour. And then they go for lunch, and then work starts at a particular time. And then at 6 o'clock, they come back, and they don't want to go home because they live with their parents. So we created an environment where that was comfortable for them to do. And our attrition rates went down over 30% because we gave them the environment that worked for them. You just have to do the same thing. I mean, it sounds like the same answer to the same question, but research is still the best way to understand and find the insights to create an action that will solve something.
Okay. Number 3, please.
Thomas Clinton, farmer, or past farmer, 59th year at it. What I've noticed in what you said and what I took in most was your wife getting the warm chicken.
Yeah.
And if we think of it quietly, that was the farming we started with.
Yeah.
Now we're in, call it, there's a lot of successful farmers in this room. And whether we like it or not, we're semi-industrialist. And we have lost that contact with our neighbours and the people around us. And the people outside the door yesterday, I don't think they basically understand what we're about.
Mm-hmm.
And I throw thought to each one here, and it has been firm in my mind since you spoke first. Why not, as a farmer, have an open day and show our neighbours? I thought of it as school children first, but I don't think it's school children at this point. I think, why do we not have an open day and show what we're doing? And we're with Glanbia. Glanbia do all the milk products, but they also make Baileys. And why not get those companies into us on that open day and show what we're doing?
Yep.
I'm only throwing it as a thought to get us back in, that everyone understands the basics.
Yeah. I would say, sorry. Go on.
Thank you.
Yeah. So, I mean, I would say you could actually go one step further than that because, for instance, where I live, we don't go to the farmers to get our food. They come to us. So they'll go to every layout and they'll come in a truck and everyone goes and buy their food and you see it and they talk to you about how it's made. It sounds like impractical to do that, but it's actually quite practical to do that. There was a conversation being had with a major shopping retailer in the UK about turning their car parks into markets every week for local farmers and for people to come. So you've got to bring the farm to the people. They're not going to come to you anymore, unfortunately. Car parks for big supermarkets are everywhere, right? So it's a great way to do that. So I think that is definitely something on a program and a local scale that should be done. But I think we have to bring it to the people as opposed to them coming to us.
Open Farm Sunday is very successful, though, across the UK, and that's something that if you are... Caroline Miller spoke a few years ago here and said, if you're good at speaking to sheep, keep speaking to sheep. Don't try and speak to the public. And I think that still remains so. But Open Farm Sunday is an answer to the point you're making. And it is an example of all of us coming together. There is a national campaign. There is a website. You can put your event on it. And it is advertised. It's a really straightforward way. And you choose your event. You decide whether you have, as Rebecca Dawes does, tens of thousands of people coming through the door, or whether you just want a very small group and a one-to-one. So to anybody who hasn't come across Open Farm Sunday, please look into it, because that is, at the very grassroots level, if you want to communicate with your consumers, that's the first step. So we have a question from the app. Is the farming brand issue a global problem, or are there good examples out there in other countries?
It's a global problem, I think. I don't see many places, because apart from the West Coast, where back to the farm and local farms are producing their own brands, farming around the world has the same problem you do, which is you're down here on the scale of the supply chain. So it's a similar problem. In other countries, it's even worse. I mean, I take a look at some markets where if you make $100, 10 cents is given to the farmer, whereas here at least it's 50 cents. So there's even bigger problems in large parts of the world, and it makes it debilitating for them to ever up the value chain, because they're just going life to life and they don't have the ability to invest anything. I think the real trick for the farming business, and you've got massive issues right now with governments and what have you, but you're going to have to invest if you're going to take advantage of some of the changes that are happening, because I don't think it's going to fall into your laps. And if you're not careful, you could go the way that other countries are going, where the yields come down, not go up. So it's a global problem, I think.
Okay, thank you very much. At the back of the hall, please.
Caroline Drummond from Leaf. Thank you very much indeed, Sally, for the plug for Open Farm Sunday and the introduction from the gentleman over there. We run Open Farm Sunday this year. It'll be the 7th of June. Over the last 14 years, some 2.5 million members of the public have gone out onto farm, thanks to the real energy of everybody that takes part. It is one day of the year, however. About 25% of people going out on Open Farm Sunday have never been on a farm before. Yep. The real trick, however, is to continue that relationship, and I'd be very grateful to know what your thoughts might be, Poran, in terms of trying to keep that engagement going through different means. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I think again, it goes back to the question before of it. I mean, I have heard of it. I have not been. I'd love to go, but I think the reality is we've got to start thinking of how do you do that times 10? How do you do it times 20? And you're going to need to find a partner to do that with, whether that's a Sainsbury's or a Tesco's or a Waitrose, I don't know. Then you've got to go and say, well, what's in it for them? And well, what's in it for them is they can test new products and new lines, which will be exclusive to their shops if it comes from local farmers. So I think you've got to find somebody to do it with strategically who has the land and the effort to make it work for you, and to increase the scale of it and get it down into more micro areas. That to me would be the most logical thing to do. You've got to go in with a point of mutual interest and mutual benefit with the partner.
We have time for 2 more questions, so take number 4, please.
Hello, Megan Powell. I'm McDonald's Progressive Young Farmer with Avara Foods and Cargill's Protein Europe. When I was doing my sort of morning scroll through Facebook this morning, I saw more posts of people criticising people who chose to take up the campaign of Veganuary, rather than posts actually advertising the campaign initially. And with the gentleman from Greggs yesterday thanking Piers Morgan for advertising his vegan sausage roll, are we doing more harm than good going against these campaigns, or how do we integrate with them correctly to sort of so that we come out not on top, but not painted as the bad guys?
I think at the end of the day, look, I think given the leadership that I think we're talking about taking, leadership often means you have to take a lot of criticism and you've got to stand above certain things. The reality is your business isn't going to stop because things are changing. These changes have to be embraced by you, engaged by you, and eventually led by you. And that might not sound like a comfortable or natural position to take when they could be threatening your livelihoods, but at the end of the day, you're going to be making the food that everybody's going to be eating. It's going to shift from one area to another, but you're going to have to embrace it. I don't really see a way around that. And over a period of time, we'll learn whether some things are fads or whether they're here to stay. These things tend to whistle out quite quickly. you can get worked up about it, and you can fight it online and take a lot of effort. If it's still there in a year and a half, 2 years' time, you're going to have to pay attention to it anyway, and you're going to have to do something about it. So my view of that is, look, you know, it's just something you're going to have to engage with and find out more about and figure out what it's going to affect you in the long run or not.
Thank you. Number 2.
Yeah, it was a fairly similar question, but sort of moving on from that. So I believe last night George Monbiot's programme, Apocalypse Cow, aired. I didn't watch it because I care about my blood pressure. But people like George seem to be able to get those programmes into the mainstream, onto BBC, onto Channel 4. How do we, as farmers, how do we get into that space? And what can individual farmers do about that?
Well, again, I think there's many, you know, as I've just been involved in the business for the last 2 years, I am constantly amazed at what you guys do and how you do it. Now, for instance, what would be entertaining for people that would put you in a good light and show your skills and show some leaderships? You know, farming in extreme environments. I've seen farms over the last few years on the top of mountains, in deserts where they've re-irrigated, in war zones. I mean, it's extraordinary. And this stuff becomes, you know, I hate to say it, and you might not like it as pure farmers, but this is what's entertaining and interesting to people. You do a lot of stuff which is on the edge of thinking. The hydroponics, the farms out at sea. It's extraordinary stuff that hasn't been made entertaining or been given a storyline or structure to. So for every one that they give you, I'm pretty sure we could give you 10 of what you're doing already. I don't see content as your problem. You've got a hell of a lot of it. It's just a question. I'm surprised I don't see any of it.
So, lots to think about. Thank you very much. Thank you for all your questions. I'm sure that everybody has got plenty more for Poran, and as far as I'm aware, you are hanging about. You're not vanishing immediately. So please continue. Thank you all for your attention, and it's time now for some much-needed coffee.
Thank you.